It's not the most megawatts, it's the ones that last.
There's no way you can be deploying billions of dollars in capital without high quality processes and systems.
Two executive leaders from the same powerhouse organization. Peter Toomey is the Chief Development Officer and Jeremy Wodakow is the Chief Commercial Officer of Cypress Creek Energy. And we explore how contrasting backgrounds and styles unite to run one of the most high-profile renewable energy organizations within the United States.
You set the outcome and the guardrails, and then you get out of the way.
Your job has to, at some point, transition from I'm the expert in the thing to I am managing the people that are the experts.
We align when we're in the room, we commit, and then we follow through. Standards and discipline don't kill speed, right? They actually make it repeatable.
So, Peter, Jeremy, welcome to Better Than We Found It.
Thanks for having us.
Yeah. Josh, thanks for having us on the show.
Looking forward to the conversation. I'm glad we're here through the technical issues and we're plain sailing now. So it should be a good conversation. I've done a quick intro to you both in the business before we started, but I'm sure I didn't do it justice. So Jeremy, perhaps to start with you, would you mind giving me a quick overview of yourself and of the organization?
Yeah, happy to give an overview of the organization and of my role here. So Cypress Creek Energy is a leading developer, owner, and operator of utility scale and distributed generation solar and battery storage across the United States. We've commercialized more than 19 gigawatts since our inception, and we have a portfolio of more than 6.8 gigawatts of operating and under construction assets, as well as a 19 gigawatt pipeline that spans across 24 different states. We deliver power solutions to meet our customers' needs. Solar, battery storage, and O&M services are at our core, but we're also advancing projects that include natural gas and powered land for data centers. Cypress Creek Solutions, our O&M business, has more than 8 gigawatts contracted across those 24 states. The mix of tools that we use to meet customer needs shifts with their requirements. In my seat as CCO, I'm responsible for operations, commercial, and financial performance of the operating portfolio, as well as the third-party O&M services business, plus origination, portfolio management, and quantitative analytics. Between us, Peter and my team comprise roughly 75% of the company's employees, and I'll hand it over to Peter.
Thanks, Jeremy. Peter Toomey, Chief Development Officer at Cypress. So my role as Chief Development Officer spans from greenfield development of our projects. So basically bringing projects into the pipeline, figuring out where to go, but also, finding the parcels and ultimately negotiating with the landowners to get access to those parcels. It spans from there through the development life cycle and ultimately through the construction process to COD, where my team hands off the projects to Jeremy's solutions / O&M team.
Great. Well, I'm very much looking forward to getting into the nuts and bolts of that setup, the way in which you guys work together. But as I always start, I'd love to hear a bit more about your own origination stories and backgrounds. And I think one of the things that makes this episode so interesting is not only do we have two executives within one organization to discuss, but also with very different backgrounds that now come together to work alongside each other. So Jeremy, maybe we can start with you. You spent your first chapter of your career in investment banking, and I think it was around 7 years structuring commodities at Goldman Sachs. Tell me, what was the exact moment that you realized the real market action shifted away from the trading floor and into the operational asset?
Yeah, Josh, that's a good question. I'm not sure it was a single moment that made me realize that the action was shifting from the trading floor into the renewable development world. As you mentioned, I started my career a couple years as an investment banker at Lehman Brothers. After being an analyst at Lehman Brothers, it was the 2002 to 2004 timeframe, just post deregulation. There was a large build out of combined cycle generation in our newly created IPPs, and with a lot of large, expensive infrastructure that takes a long time to build. there was an overbuild, which resulted in some financial difficulty for the IPPs that built the generation. And at that time, it was really, the first time that private equity and financial sponsors were really investing in the power space. And when they invest in assets, they like to include leverage in order to increase equity returns. And for a commodity producing asset, assets that are exposed to, the most volatile prices in the world, they really needed to stabilize cash flow in order to make their business model in the power space work. And so, Goldman at the time was working on delivering solutions to enable these acquisitions by private equity shops. And they wanted to stabilize a significant amount of cash flow. And in order to do that, they wanted to ensure that cash flow stability didn't turn into a liquidity crisis. And so they were looking at, commodities as not just like blocking and tackling, but as a corporate finance tool, really for the first time. And it required, not just putting the right commodity risk management solution in place, but to integrate that with the collateral needs of these transactions. And so I was recruited to work on the floor at Goldman. And what was really exciting was we were able to combine all the elements of the transaction. So the commodity transaction, the financing, as well as the M&A advisory to really deliver a complete solution to the customer. And due to that, we're really at the forefront of what was going on in the market at the time. And us and our competitors really were in, the mix of everything going on in power. That was really exciting. And, that kind of continued through my career. And then, ultimately I built out the US business for Axpo, which is a Swiss energy company. And, really my background has been in structuring, and my interest really aligned with some of these, more, structured, complex situations that, you need to put the pieces together and see how it fits for the customer and see how it fits for your business to find a solution. And really what I found over time at Axpo was that the growth in renewables had really led to a bit of a disintermediation of these structured commodity transactions in the wholesale markets. So really what I mean by that is producers started selling straight to buyers, cutting out the trading middle layer. And, due to that, I think what I had really enjoyed about the market had become less prevalent in my role at Axpo. And so when the opportunity at Cypress Creek arose, I knew it was something that I was interested in trying.
And I speak to, in our role as executive search consultants, we speak to individuals that want to make that shift from, the finance world into the operational business. But sometimes can be overwhelmed by the actual nature of the assets or what they mean. Do you remember the first time you stepped foot, at an operational asset, and where was it? What was it? And how did it make you feel?
Yeah. I do. So, what was interesting about the transition is Cypress was also transitioning its business and, really turning into an IPP itself, and, needing to change how we did a lot of things, right? Financing at scale, constructing at scale, operating at scale, and also adding a more complex commercial layer. And so one of the real, things that really interested me about the role were, one, given my commercial background and the needs of the organization, I felt like I could come in and add value day one. And, one of the things that was quite appealing was getting exposure to that operational side of the business and the development side of the business. Like, for all intents and purposes, I spent my whole career in like financial services, right? Even physical wholesale commodities is really a financial services business. So the exposure to the operating and development business was something that I really looked forward to as an opportunity to learn and expand my skill set as a professional. The first time I was at an operating asset, we grew up as a developer of 5 megawatt QF projects in the Carolinas, Cypress as a company. That was really the roots. And so we have a lot of projects that are scattered throughout the Carolinas. And we also have a pretty large office, one of our largest offices in the Durham North Carolina area. And so one of my first visits was to a site called Snow Camp. It's one of these older QF projects, and it just had close proximity to the office. And I think the thing that struck me for the first time was, I'd been to larger fossil assets earlier in my career, particularly as an investment banker. Um, visiting coal plants and gas plants and sale processes. What struck me about solar was, we showed up to the site with one of our regional managers, and there was nobody else there. It was like 5 megawatt unmanned site. So that was a little bit of a shock to me.
And Peter, your background's slightly different, but maybe you could recount that same tale for me, or your exposure to the asset for the first time, and the impact it had for you.
Yeah, I mean, I started in 2005 working for a company that was developing wind projects called Community Energy, and as far as which I can remember, one of the first projects I remember going to was the Atlantic City Utilities Authority wind project. It's 5G turbines outside the Borgata Casino in Atlantic City. And I just thought it was like really cool that it was basically powering a like a wastewater treatment plant behind the meter. But that was one of the first ones I witnessed, and I thought it was kind of big, right? You have 5 giant G 1.5 megawatt turbines. In retrospect, it was like a DG project. But I think that was the first one that I visited as is it possible I drove by one at some point in my life prior to that? Yes, but that was the first one I remember visiting as part of my job. And yeah, I was responsible for managing that portion of that commercially. But I had kind of come in after they had already, built the project, and that was my first foray, since I've been involved in, much larger projects. But
sure. And your background was heavily rooted in renewable energy credits. But the interesting part for me in talking through your background was then you found yourself later commercially managing the largest fossil fuel power plant in New York City. I'm interested to understand how seeing that legacy oil and gas asset up close changed perhaps your perspective on clean energy, or particularly around the transition and how you make it realistically happen.
Right. Well, I actually studied renewable energy markets in graduate school, and subsequently moved into a commercial role at Community Energy, and then from there sort of branched off into doing development and power marketing and other commercial aspects of the renewable development world. But yes, relatively recently in that sort of span, I ended up, at an LS Power portfolio company called Rise Light and Power. It's subsequently been sold off, but managing the Ravenswood facility from a commercial standpoint. And yeah, I mean, so what our business model was, okay, the one asset we had was Ravenswood, which was like a 2 gigawatt thermal plant in the heart of New York City. What we were trying to do was build HVDC transmission that would terminate there and ultimately allow us to retire one or more of the units of that plant, both from upstate, so bringing upstate solar and wind, and then also out to the New York Bight, which is the New York offshore wind lease areas, to bring that offshore wind power to New York City. But yeah, I mean, it was eye-opening in two ways. One, how difficult we were working with the New York ISO and others to how do we replace some of these units with the energy on the other end of those HVDC lines. How could be, whether it's offshore wind or whether it's a mix of wind and solar from upstate, how do we do that? And it's, especially when you consider the needs of keeping the lights on in the biggest city in the country, it's actually very hard. I mean, reliability is a challenge. It is expensive, and you look at what it takes. It takes a 2 gigawatt plant in the middle of New York City that can run on multiple fuels to make sure that whether it's the middle of winter and all the gas is going to, commercial and residential customers, and you got to run on oil, or whether it's, the middle of summer and everyone's blaring their air conditioners and you got to ramp, one of the largest, gas turbines, in the country, up for the, maybe the only time in the year other than testing. So we had 360-year-old units there. So it was okay. It's really complex to maintain reliability, and it's difficult to replace that. It's going to take a mix of resources to replace that. But it was also interesting that we, as I live in New York City. I'd like to think it's a relatively forward thinking place. I mean, we're relying on, 60-year-old plants to make sure the lights stay on, both in the summer and potentially in the winter if it's really cold for multiple days. So I think it was eye-opening. It kind of taught me a little bit about what it's going to take to ultimately transition, even partially away from fossil. But also that we need to be a little bit forward thinking about, it probably doesn't make sense to rely on 60-year-old plants to keep the lights on. If you can maybe build something more efficient, even if it does, rely on fossil fuel for the time being. And frankly, even if you're, almost especially if you're looking to develop more renewables, that have their, specific production profile, having efficient, fast ramping resources is useful for that. So those are some of the lessons that I learned from that experience, which was unique in the 20-year span of my career. I haven't worked on either transmission or fossil any other time, but that it gave good insight into kind of what it's going to take to go to take the next step in sort of the renewable rollout.
For sure. And I think that, the pragmatic approach is something that we hear a lot from our clients, and taking a view of not just, one is better than the other, but it's going to take an amalgamation of everything to help us get there. If we're trending in the right way, that's a positive for us all. Thinking about your careers though, and I suppose the sort of individual journey that you have both been on with those backgrounds, maybe Jeremy, if I can come back to you. I think one of the things that stood out to me was your own transition from being a high performing individual contributor to having to build a team from scratch at Axpo and build that business unit. What would you say were some of the leadership lessons you learned in going from something where you really understand and can control your destiny to relying on and building a team that has to do it for you or with you?
It's a great question, Josh. Letting go of control of the individual contributor role is it's a big challenge, right? You've come to trust yourself, rely on the accuracy and the comprehensiveness of the work that you've done. And when you're on the floor, your instinct is to analyze the information that's available to you and to make the right call and to do it fast, right? Building a team, that's a habit that you need to unlearn. So you set the outcome and the guardrails, and then you get out of the way. So, that's all about empowerment. And in order to empower, though, it requires expectation setting, commitment, and accountability. So, as you mentioned at Axpo, we built it from the ground up. I started as the first employee. The initial team that we had there was 7 people. So at that size, I was able to be in every decision, be on top of every deliverable, every work stream. When we grew to 30 to 35, that was no longer possible. So it became clear that I need to empower the leaders in order for us to hit our goals and achieve our objectives. So really, like, directness and speed and the instinct to make the call yourself because you could do it the fastest is the thing that you need to change. And so in order to do that, it requires front end alignment. People need to understand the why. You also need to build mutual trust before pushing for the result. And, that's a real trade-off, right? It's an upfront investment that pays back over time by removing, the need to follow up and, the need to dig into the details. Um, if you have to follow up on something that you've already decided to and committed to, that's where micromanagement comes into play, which nobody likes.
And was this something that you self-taught? And if so, maybe there were some mistakes along the way that helped you understand what was required, or were there mentors within the organization or outside the organization that helped you with that leadership journey? Because it's not as straightforward as high performers would sometimes believe it to be. So, yeah, how did you get to the stage you are now?
Yeah, it required iteration, honestly. Like I didn't have like a, management 101 course that I took when I transitioned. I definitely made some mistakes along the way. Um, I learned mostly by being open to feedback, right? I think it's really important to not only listen to, but to solicit feedback on how you're doing as a manager and a leader, and to understand where what you're doing is working for your team versus not working for your team. And not everybody's the same, and not everybody responds the same way. So each person may need something different. And I think, that's one of the maybe the most, the biggest challenges in the transition is realizing that you spend your whole career, 10 or 20 years or however long it takes, building up this skill set and being a subject matter expert on the thing that you're doing. And, then you get a team, and then the team grows, and your role is no longer being the person who's good at that particular thing. Right now you need to figure out how to get the most out of everybody on the team, and you need to spend your time focused on management, not focused on delivering necessarily yourself. Obviously there's an element of being a player coach and still some mix of that, but
Sure.
really, like, being a manager requires you to think about everyone on your team as much as you think about yourself and your career and your growth. And that's a lesson that I'm still learning. And I'm working on continuous improvement and getting better every day and continuing to listen to feedback. But I think that's something that I'll probably strive for the rest of my career.
For sure. Yeah, great words there. Thank you. And Peter, as we were talking about your story, I know that your responsibility grew significantly overnight when you had a responsibility for one area, and then it's expanded significantly with engineering, procurement, construction on top of that. Um, Tell me a bit about that journey for you when you went from, as Jeremy just explained, really understanding the subject matter that you were leading to actually running functions where maybe you were less well informed, shall we say?
Right. Yeah, I mean, I think sort of stepping back a little, I mean, throughout my career, I've always been interested in trying to build towards a holistic understanding of this business and like how it works, like having a curiosity about how things work, right? Even if, it's something that, is not it may not look like, okay, this is like, the next obvious step in your career progression, more thinking about it like I'm trying to fill in the blanks. So I've generally been interested in taking on a challenge and finding ways to grow, not just sort of up the chain, but also, broadening my breadth. So I mean, in respect to going from sort of, the chief development officer that is responsible for development, environmental, and sort of those pre-construction functions, to one that also has to manage the technical functions on the EPC side. I mean, first of all, it's a very fast process. So I didn't have a long time to make a decision. So I made it fast with the idea that, okay, I'm gonna figure this out. I've done this before. And the only thing I that went through my head was really like, should there be someone else doing this, right? Or does it make sense to kind of collapse this set of responsibilities into what I'm doing? And I think my gut feel was that it actually makes sense to take a project from the very beginning to operations and remove some of the sort of siloing. And my sense was I'd find the right people to put in the right seats and figure out, what I needed to, what were the right questions I need to, ask them to make sure I was staying on top of it. And that's kind of it. I think it's gone pretty well. I'm sure there are many things I still need to learn. But the reality is you're just not going to be an expert in everything. I mean, Jeremy definitely, alluded to all this. Like your job has to at some point transition from I'm the expert in the thing, right? The subject matter expert, to I am managing the people that are the experts. And I need to get results out of the people that are the experts, and that's my job versus doing the thing itself. And listen, certainly, there's always room for improvement, and I strive to do so every day, but so far I think it's gone reasonably well.
Well, I'm not going to pull out your 360 feedback report, so don't worry about that to put you on the spot. But I am going to ask you a question that I suppose from a practical sense. Okay, if someone's listening to this, they're taking their first step up, let's say to an executive position, they've understood a function really well, they've nailed it, so the team leadership is okay because they've done pretty much every role that they've led. When you move to something that you haven't done those roles before, you said something about putting the right people into the right seats, which is a philosophy I'm sure many listening will know is correct. But how do you either ask the right questions to know you've got the right people in the right seats, or even know what to look for when it's not a skill set you've had to recruit for previously? How did you approach that task?
Well, I mean, you first of all have to do your homework, right? I mean, you have to be curious enough to learn, quite a bit about what the role really entails and what is required. And that will continue, right? If you're in the seat, all of these things come up outside of your area of expertise. So you have to learn enough to be able to ask the right questions. I think there's also value in sort of triangulating on the right answer by talking to people that you trust, right? So whether it's former colleagues or people you trust within the current organization, getting second and third opinions on things, right? And you probably need to establish a informal sort of, group of advisors that you're able to informally kind of get advice from on these sorts of things. I think that's always valuable, and it's never going to be perfect. You're never going to have someone that does all the stuff, but they may have a perspective that you don't. And I think it's worth being humble and asking people for help when you need it.
Sure.
So Josh, I just have one thing to add on that.
Yeah.
So as Peter mentioned, it starts with being curious and learning enough to be dangerous. But then I think what's really important is the ability to apply a commercial lens or a commercial framing, and to pressure test the answers that you're receiving in that light. I think if you take a commercial view to anything you're doing, I think you can dig in and assess it to a degree where, you can make sure that, you're headed towards the right outcome. So, saying, walk me through the assumptions, it really applies to any discipline, right? It's not subject matter specific. And I think as long as you can take a commercial lens to the answers, you can get to a good place.
And with that in mind, so when you say it kind of can apply to various areas, I suppose there's the two components to it. By having the right people in the right seats, you've got the technical skill set that will allow you to really make sure that the I's are dotted, the T's are crossed. But I suppose you both also have a viewpoint of what makes a good team member for your team from a behavioral perspective. And, there'll be some characteristics or traits that maybe are unified for all of your employees. And then, of course, specific roles will have slightly different nuances to that. But have you ever spent time thinking about that? Do you spend time with your team making sure they're clear on what are the behaviors or the standards that are expected? And have you found when you've done that, you've improved the output of the team, even if the technical skill set hasn't?
Yeah, I can start there, Josh. So, to me that sounds a little bit like culture setting and making sure, people are on the same page with how, we work together as a team. And so, I have a few principles that I like to employ with my team. And actually for new hires, I typically walk through, the team culture, my ways of working. I ask them how they like to work and how they like to communicate. I ask for any feedback with it. But so some of the big principles here for me are, you know, it goes back to that empowerment and accountability frame that we talked about earlier, which is, we align when we're in the room, we commit, and then we follow through. Like if we commit to something, we follow through. If you disagree, we talk about it before we leave the room so we can make sure that we drive alignment. But once we get that alignment, the follow through and the accountability is required. Um, I also think that psychological safety is really important. So no matter your seniority, you could be someone who's been on the team for 1 month, 1 year, right out of college. Everybody has the ability to ask questions and to challenge assumptions. Doesn't matter what your seniority is. Like everybody has value and a place in the conversation. And obviously you need to be respectful and professional, but everybody can question and challenge. And then the last principle that I have is, we make decisions in ambiguity, right? We're operating with uncertainty. Like it's really important to me that the team thinks about, the risks comprehensively, that we assess all of the information that is available to us, knowing that, we can't know everything. Certain things are unknowable, but if it is knowable, I want to make sure that we're incorporating it into our view and that we assess it, we quantify it, and we talk about it when making the decision. And then at the end, when the story plays out, we debrief so we learn from what we've done. Those are like a few of the core principles that I like to operate under with my team.
Thanks for sharing that. I think that's great, valuable advice. Peter, are there any other principles for you that are crucial or that you've either seen play out in a good way or maybe even unintended consequences negatively?
Well, yeah, I'll take it a little bit slightly different direction, and it kind of plays on what something Jeremy said earlier. I mean, the ability to communicate why you're doing something, especially when you talk about people that are technical experts, right? Like, why as a business should we do this, as opposed to like it's the next step in a predefined process. There's I've found, as I've managed different types of people in different roles, so that it's not automatic that you're going to get someone that's going to orient to, okay, why should the business decide to do this? And it's certainly something that I've had to continue to coach on is, okay, we're going to go to our investment committee to recommend something, a decision that's going to cost, $500,000 or $1 million or more. And you will find, and I found that, people will have their reason for having to do this because the world they work in requires this as the next step in a project. But the reality is, like, what the investment committee needs to hear is, like, why is this a good decision for the company? And constantly trying to orient people to the broader objectives of the business, like connecting their decisions to that and making sure that they're oriented to that. So then they can explain why they're doing what they're doing or what they're recommending makes sense in that context is something as leaders that we have to continue to reinforce. And it just certainly comes more naturally to some people than others, depending on, their backgrounds. I would say, folks that are maybe more technical, it's going to be a little bit, they're focusing on very, sort of esoteric things, whether it's process or engineering or something else. And they're focused on that and they're good at that. And they're not necessarily business people, in sort of the broadest sense. But it is important that they understand how to connect the decisions they're making to the broader business objectives. And I think that's something that we have to continue to emphasize. And to Jeremy made the point earlier. So I think that's one of the reasons why, frankly, like we were brought on board. The company was very much a development, focused company in the past. Like just getting projects into the pipeline. And I think one thing that, the leadership at the time was looking to do is bring more of that commercial mindset to the business. I think something that Jeremy and I both were hired to do.
Thank you. Great examples there. Thinking a bit more broadly about this culture setting, aligning on responsibilities, committing to something and then executing, Jeremy, to your point, I'm really interested, and one of the key points of this conversation for me is the gray area in which your teams work. A lot of organizations and the structures that we would either recruit into or be looking at when we're talking to executive teams within clean energy firms maybe have more executives that handle the areas that you two do. So I'm interested to understand how that perhaps kind of handover process works between your teams. How do you both align on what good looks like, so that, Peter, what you and your team are doing up front doesn't negatively impact, in fact helps Jeremy and his team, for years to come? And as executives who work so closely together, how do you work on that relationship to ensure that it is in the best interest of all parties, and having the success that you guys are?
Yeah, that's a really good question, Josh. Handoffs are really important. So, every organization is going to have seams, right? And so when Peter expanded his scope to include not just development, but also the EPCM business, he removed the seam, but kind of created a seam in the, back end of his EPCM business, which is project execution, to the solutions, which is the name of our operating business. We call it Cypress Creek Solutions. It's our own fleet as well as our third party O&M business. So we created a seam between project execution and the solutions team. And as you mentioned, like the handoff is where things break, right? So I think what we've tried to do is a few things. One, create early alignment. Two, build a feedback loop. And three, we've really implemented a number of like formal standardized processes. We have a continuous improvement team here, and they've really supported in creating some really great processes that allow us to manage some of these seams and project advancement through the life cycle really well. So, one example, bringing in commercial early during the development phase. So if you bring in the commercial lens or the customer lens, I guess more accurately put, the commercial view of the customer needs in the beginning of the process, not at the finish line, it really helps us allow our customer, the ultimate buyer of our product, to direct where we develop, where we acquire sites, what the attributes are of those projects or those solutions that they need, which is really critical. If you bring it in at the end, development of a project of any sort, these days, is a 4-year process if you're lucky in ERCOT. It's longer elsewhere, maybe a decade in some markets. And so if you don't bring that customer lens in early, you're likely going to end up with a pipeline that doesn't have a lot of interested buyers. So aligning that, not only the customer lens, but also our policy lens, development, as well as, grid integration and a number of other SMEs into a consolidated prioritization process for site acquisition, both, development, greenfield development, as well as M&A, I think has been really useful for us. Two, site design feedback. We operate a significant fleet of assets, not only our own assets, but also for our third-party customers. And so we have a lot of data and a lot of visibility into, how different OEMs respond to warranties, how their supply chains look, how different equipment performs, whether, this model versus the other model from a particular inverter manufacturer has problems or doesn't have problems. And so, creating a feedback loop that spans, operations and circles back into, Peter's team on the design and engineering side really helps us, improve how we engineer our projects, how we select equipment, and also how we design. So, those are two really critical, components to managing that seam or that handoff and making sure this comprehensive process operates more efficiently. And then, as I mentioned, we've really formalized processes that define, what is required for a handoff and who's responsible, which is, necessary, but not sufficient to be really good at this, right? You also need, familiarity and alignment across teams for it to really work well.
And without kind of giving away any of the secret sauce here, but just practically, what does that look like? Are your teams, Jeremy, in Peter's meetings? Is there almost a secondment from your teams to be sitting in Peter's teams for a while to understand what that process actually looks like? Are you bringing your customers into the conversation early with Peter's teams, but your team's handling the relationship? Like, just a few practical things without giving too many secrets away of how are you actually doing this?
Yeah, maybe I'll let Peter take this one.
Sure.
I mean, I think so. We tend to have what we call project one calls. So let's say for a given project, it's going to have the project's going to have what we'll call project CEO. That could be the developer during the development life cycle, or it could be someone from the project execution team once the project's under construction or thereabouts. But then you have a project team associated with that, and that needs to include people from across the organization, including someone from Jeremy's solutions team, right? And I think making sure you have the right participants that are part of the project team as early as you reasonably can. That's like a practical thing you can do. You can create these calls that create that socialization. I would say, you can do the policies like Jeremy said. We have like handoff policies, right? Like there's basically, think of it as sort of the equivalent as a checklist, right? That you go through and the teams do it together, right? In person or, preferably in person as it's time to hand the project off. But you do need to make sure that there are actual relationships between the groups, right? Like human to human relationships between the groups, and a shared understanding for what we're all trying to accomplish. Because there's always going to be, let's say if you're talking about design of a project, there's always going to be some tension between, or there may be some tension between, design decisions and the cost of those decisions and how they impact operations long term. And in sort of the most simplistic world, you're going to have one side that wants to bring the cost down and one side that wants to make sure that, the project is gold plated, let's say. Right now, the reality is always like much closer to the middle, but making sure that everyone kind of understands where the project is, what we're trying to accomplish, if the project has seen, certain deterioration of returns, let's say, and you need to save costs somewhere, like there are trade-offs, right? You have to look at the life cycle costs and all that, but you're going to have to make some trade-offs. And it's important for the people involved from both sides to have some sort of, real relationship, and understand the challenges that each other face. But then also have an understanding of, what the business objective. This gets back to that point, I think, always orienting towards what are the business objectives. So you don't end up, getting too hung up on, okay, well, these guys are asking for this and these guys want this. Well, why are we doing this, guys? We're doing this to get to the best possible business outcome for the company, which is good for all of us. Yes, it may not be what any one of us, would want in a vacuum, but it's a decision we have to get to together to advance the ball as a company.
Sure. And yeah, as you say, it comes back to that selling telling the story, the vision, almost storytelling to bring that alignment. Everything you've said sounds very ideological, but I'm sure it hasn't always worked out. Without bringing anything into disrepute, it would be great to hear if there was one particular story maybe you could tell us about, maybe where your teams didn't align, and how, as two executives, sometimes you guys need to pick up the phone, or, as I understand it, walk only a few feet down the office corridor to each other and have a chat to discuss how you're going to resolve it. Can you tell me a story about that?
I'll let Jeremy take that one. Yeah.
Yeah.
You're welcome.
Yeah. Thanks, Peter. No, Josh, I mean, it's, obviously it would be great if, all this happened seamlessly and there were no differences of opinion that needed to be resolved. But that's not the real world, right? Like, issues always pop up, things need to be managed. Peter and I sit 15 feet from each other. It's easy for us to walk into one another's office and align. We also both come from, even though they're quite disparate in terms of the career arc, we both come from relatively commercial backgrounds. So we kind of approach problems from a similar vantage. And, I think it is pretty easy for us to align. And even if we don't fully agree, we can get behind a path forward pretty easily. We're also two people, not a big group, so it makes it easier to do. Yeah, we can give you a particular example. It's always important to talk about what's working well and things that might need improvement. So, we talked about processes, right? And so another process that we've rolled out in the past couple of years is a QA QC process. So, Cypress, as we mentioned in its early days, was developing 5 megawatt QF projects in the Carolinas. We've really shifted since then. We've got multiple gigawatts that we're commercializing this year. We have 500 megawatt plus projects, multiple 500 megawatt plus projects in construction, and so, like, how we used to do things versus like how we do them now, it's very different, right? And so, the commercial structures that we're operating under are also very different. They come with like different risk and require different approaches and mitigants. And so, an example of another policy that we rolled out this year is a QA QC policy. And you know our our EPC team is largely a new team, right? And a lot of the folks on the solution side have been here for a long time. And so, you know, we've come from sort of two different perspectives and two different ways of doing things when it came to QA QC. So we now have a much bigger presence in the field, like throughout the construction process. We have a site manager, we have like Cypress either fielded or contracted QA QC inspectors that are there kind of full time, and like we're like actively managing construction projects in a way that we didn't used to do. And so, the solutions team was used to really like I'll call it putting a lot of oversight on these like check-in points, mechanical completion or substantial completion. And the new way of working of the EPC team is like they're there on site, they have people checking every day along the way. And so um I think there was a little bit of a disconnect on how these two approaches should work together. And there was a gap that showed up between the teams, right? Like Peter was getting feedback from his team that things weren't working, and I was getting feedback from my team that things weren't working as well. And so I think what we did was we got people together, right? We got the teams to fly down to Houston, and we got in a room. And I think going back to what Peter said is we like worked on building relationships. We had everybody give their background, say something about themselves, like made sure the teams like started to know each other better. And then we got into how we're doing things, and both teams gave, overview of what their day to day is like, and what's working well and what issues they're experiencing. And I think, throughout that process, we really just like found where the gap was, and then we're able to close it and, update the policy to reflect this new way of working with a common understanding. So, we're able to resolve that situation. And I think the behavior that models is, you're always going to encounter issues, right? This is about being able to identify gaps, to surface them, and to talk through constructively. And again, as Peter mentioned, like with a common objective in mind, and figure out the best way to do something rather than like defending the historical approach. And so that's an example of, when things don't work in an ideal way. Look, I think being open and approaching something, assuming, good intent from, your colleague or your counterparty, is always the best way to start.
For sure. And, I think that's a great example. A lot of organizations might feel as though they're too busy, or all of that downtime of flying everybody to one location might be too much downtime for them to take. But I'm sure the results pay themselves back really quickly because of the relationships that were built. And I'm sure it's probably strengthened the harmony between the teams.
Yeah, it's so important that we're making sure that it happens quarterly. Like we have a geographically diverse workforce, right? We have offices across the country, probably 7 or 8 of them. We also grew a lot during COVID, so we have a lot of remote employees, and there's like no substitute for spending time in person.
I think, Josh, I think that's an important point. I mean, it can feel inefficient, right? To try to do all that, to try to push for engagement amongst the teams, and it's not, people are busy, right? That's the reality. Like we've got a lot of projects going on. We're trying to put a lot of projects, into construction, and folks are busy, and it isn't always easy to have everyone empathize with the other person's position, because like Jeremy said, you disparate organization geographically, and you have different experiences with the company. And I think it's not, we shouldn't it's not like, okay, we're just gonna just set up a meeting and then you solve all the problems. Like, it takes time, and it doesn't automatically work. And I think it is important for leadership to like demonstrate that there is alignment at the highest levels, so folks can like get on board and and feel like it's okay to kind of come together. Because there are going to be, at least to some extent, different perspectives or different priorities amongst the teams, right? It really is, I think, our job to demonstrate how they should be, but that they also that we are aligned as an organization, right? Like, we are trying to accomplish the same thing. And yes, like, we're looking at it from different perspectives, but we're trying to get to the same place. I think it's like easy to say that, but harder to do it, right? You kind of have to do it all. You kind of have to like consistently, push the message. And it has to be true. It has to feel true to people. So I don't think we should gloss over the fact that that's like an ongoing thing that you have to keep working on all the time.
Mm-hmm. I suppose it's any relationship, isn't it? Whether that's your spouse, your co-executive, or the teams that you lead, it's they're all ongoing, because people change and things change. So you have to keep ahead of it. Well, just practically in terms of the two of you, how often are you guys talking, meeting, discussing things? Is it every single day, or? But I appreciate you traveling a lot, but what does that actually look like for your cadence of meetings and conversations?
I mean, I would be surprised if there was a day where there wasn't, at a minimum, like a bunch of text traffic, right? But there's usually, we're here a lot of the time. We're here being New York City office. Let's go grab coffee, walk down the street. Like, I think there's for us, it's a little easier for it to be less formalized, right? Like, I don't even think I have a planned one-on-one with Jeremy, because we just, we're our businesses work so closely together that we're kind of just constantly in contact. I think it would be interesting if we went like 2 or 3 days without that, like what would happen? It would feel like something's missing, right? But that's not, I mean, I think that's somewhat unique and not always easy to replicate. I mean, some of it's about personalities, some of it's about location, some of it's about business overlap, right? So we shouldn't expect like the rest of the team to be able to have the same experience.
Sure.
It'd be nice, but it's
Yeah.
not necessarily going to happen.
Yeah, makes sense. So shifting us on to the wider industry, and I really appreciate everything you shared about the business and what that means. But the business is operating within a wider industry that I just want to touch on before we finish. Obviously, the renewable industry has grown up through a very scrappy entrepreneurial mindset to get to the level it has, given the domination of the fossil fuel industry. But given where it is today now, and the size and scale of these projects that you guys are running, and also the industry is delivering, I suppose there is a journey that all businesses within this space are going on. I just wonder how you get the balance right between retaining that entrepreneurial go-getter mindset of breaking down barriers and creating new things versus actually we are a pretty sizable business now, and these processes and structures, as you've focused on, Jeremy, need to be there. But with the new school and the old school, they're always kind of competing with each other. How do you keep that entrepreneurial spirit to deliver what's required, and not slow down too much, but not leaving yourself too exposed to the risks?
Yeah, I can take the first crack here, Peter. I'll be quick and I'll pass it to you. Like, standards and discipline don't kill speed, right? They actually make it repeatable. So underwriting, risk frameworks, capital discipline, they actually allow you to move fast without blowing up. So you keep the entrepreneurial spirit by empowering people inside of those clear guardrails, not by completely removing the guardrails. And so people have creativity to operate within the parameters and the realities of the business. And I think it actually drives, creativity and an entrepreneurial mindset. I don't know, Peter, what your thoughts are on that.
Yeah, I mean, there's no way, and we spent a lot of time over the last 3 years doing this, but there's no way you can be deploying billions of dollars in capital without, high quality processes and systems. And I would say that, we've come a long way. We have to continue to get better in those areas. And what I found is you need that. You need people to adhere to it. You need people not to maybe hide behind it, though, right? Like it's still, there's still discretion and judgment required within those boundaries that Jeremy described, and people have to like recognize that and continue to push the envelope, recognizing that there's there's like a envelope we have to function within. Because there is there's comfort in having a process, right? And there's comfort in using the process for a reason why you do and don't do anything. But I think this comes back to sort of the business objectives things. Like, okay, we're establishing this so we don't make any big mistakes, and so we can cumulatively have our decisions moving us towards our objectives. But people still have to like use their discretion, right? They still have to like align with the business objectives and find creative ways to solve problems. So it is making sure that while you put all this stuff in place, and you make sure that you do it in a way that doesn't create too much administrative burden on people that feels like it's restraining. But it is critical. And ultimately, if you can find that balance between, okay, you have guardrails, but you need to push within those, I think that's where the sweet spot is.
Yeah. And Josh, you didn't ask this question like explicitly, but implicitly, this business has undergone a seismic shift in the last, 18 months, plus or minus, right? Like the needs and the objectives of the customer have really changed, right? We went from utilities and C&I customers looking to decarbonize consumption or hit RPS goals to, the need for physical power to, turn megawatt hours into bytes, right? To fuel, the growth of AI and, to ensure that we can build data centers. And, I think that is a different solution than we as a company and, we as an industry have been delivering, in the past. And so, all the work that we've been doing over the last few years to, put in place systems and processes and create standards and a commercial lens is actually enabling our business to evolve and address the needs of the market today, which if we hadn't gone through that journey, like we would not be able to move this quickly, with the speed of the market. We've seen it shift, right? Everyone's been watching it. It's been unbelievable. We would have never been able to keep up, right? And we've been able to, lean on our core, on our history, on what we've historically been good at, and use that to pivot into new things and, create solutions for customers that, we just wouldn't have been able to do if we hadn't put that rigor in place and we hadn't set those standards and we hadn't shifted the culture to be more commercially minded.
For sure. And yeah, an evolving market needs an evolving philosophy around business. And it sounds like you were very well set up to capitalize on that, which is great to hear. And I'm sure the success of the business is going to continue to that effect. I've got a couple of quick fire questions for each of you I'd like to go with, and then we can wrap this up. So Peter, I'll start with you. In your career, what would you say is the best piece of advice you've ever received?
Right. All right. So I'm gonna go a little bit different direction with this. So when I played hockey in college, my coach, his name was Tim Taylor. He former Olympic hockey coach. He would tell us all the time to hurry up, but don't rush. And this sort of is in line with what we've been talking about now. Like you have to move fast, but you can't be out of control when you're doing it. Right. And it applies surprisingly often to what we're doing, because it's not a matter of, okay, be really deliberate or go fast. Like you kind of have to find the balance between the two.
Great advice. Jeremy, what about for you?
Yeah. So I don't know if this was advice, maybe more of a observed behavior that I picked up on. But as a leader, it's really important to give people credit when things go well and take responsibility when there's a problem. Like issues can get handled within the team. Protect the team from above. That builds a bought in and motivated team.
Great. And what would you say, Jeremy, back to you, is the most underestimated trait of a highly effective executive team?
Yeah, I think this kind of goes back to one of my team culture principles, but like it's important to be able to disagree in the room and then collectively commit to the agreed upon action and follow through. Like you don't need to be right. We are going to align on how we're going to move forward, and then you need to support it, whether it was your initial position or not.
Peter, what about you?
I think, to me, the ability to strike a balance with the organization between like trusting them and verifying, right? Like we sit at the top and we have to understand what's going on in the business, but we also have to trust people and, another word, I guess, would be empower them to make decisions and feel ownership over what they're doing. And it's finding the right balance between those two is really important.
And I'd like you to both finish this sentence for me. The future of clean energy is, Peter?
Flexibility.
Jeremy?
A path to power delivered when and where the customer actually needs it.
Very good. I am fascinated by these conversations, talking to a range of leaders in the clean energy space. You two have been great guests, but I'm thinking already ahead to my next series. You're both extremely well connected in this space. If there could be one person that each of you think would be great to tell their story and that of their organization, who would it be and why?
So there's a gentleman, Richard Matsui. He's the co-founder of Kilowatt Hour Analytics. They've been subsequently sold, but they're like a provider of insurance products, including some, weather and risk and commodity risk management products. But he's an interesting guy. He's done a lot recently on sort of the looking into how AI can help drive the renewables business forward. And I think he'd just be an interesting person to talk to.
Right. I'll check him out, or if you can give me an intro, that'd be great. Jeremy?
Sounds good.
Yeah, I think, it would be quite interesting for you to, and I'm not going to name anyone specific here, but, someone who is a FERC commissioner or maybe leadership at one of the ISOs, I think could be really interesting. We talked about this, tectonic shift that, we're undergoing. And I think the, folks in those seats, people at PJM or ERCOT who are, grappling with this, huge shift in demand and how they're going to bring it onto the system reliably could be really, really interesting chats.
For sure. Well, watch this space, because there's a couple of conversations early stage that I'm having right now that might unlock that. So I'll have to send you the episodes when hopefully we get them done. To finish with then, the podcast is called Better Than We Found It. I believe in terms of your career, you should always be aiming to leave things in better places than when you found them. But for you both individually, when you eventually step back from your corporate roles, what would you like that legacy to be, to feel that you've done your part and left the world better than you found it? Jeremy, if I start with you.
Yeah, sure. Happy to take that one first. So, there's a number of factors there, right, to leave the world in a better place. So, one, I've seen throughout my career that at the end of the day, serving your customer well is really important, right? Not only for your success, but for their success. And so, serving customers reliably and delivering power on time, and above all, is like actually delivering the solution that the customer needs, whether that's a service offering or decarbonization or consumption or speed to power, is really critical, right? And I think that's what the energy transition actually needs. It's not the most megawatts, it's the ones that last. And I think we need to prove that renewables can, be a real commercial discipline and still deliver. So, the financial mistakes of, megawatts, no matter what, of that era were not inevitable. You can make disciplined business decisions and run a successful commercial organization while still improving the carbon footprint of the grid. So those things would be really important to me. And then I think just on top of that, helping a generation of people that I've worked with and that work on my team, learn to like operate at a really, really high standard.
Great. Some big objectives there, but I've no doubt you'll make them happen. Peter, what about you?
Yeah, I mean, so I got into this business, more from sort of the sustainable energy angle, right? So obviously we've come such a long way. When I started in this business, we had, I think, 10 gigawatts of renewables in the US. Now we have over 400 gigawatts. So we've made great strides there. But continuing to sort of, deliver on that promise, but do it in a way that respects both like all the stakeholders in the communities we develop projects in, and also do it in an affordable way that, I think when you're, first setting out, you're not thinking about all these, sort of trade-offs that are required, and, striking the right balance between all these different trade-offs that are required to bring any new source of power on the grid. So basically delivering more on the promise of renewables, but making sure we do that in a way that makes sense for everybody.
Fantastic. Well put. Thank you so much. And I just want to say thank you to you both for sharing so eloquently your stories, your views of the market, your leadership philosophies, and certainly some great practical takeaways for people to hear. I'm sure those listening will be interested in the journey of the organization and you guys individually. If people are keen to connect or find out more, can they reach out? And if so, where's the best place to try and hunt you down or find you?
Yeah, absolutely. So listeners can visit us on our website, cypresscreekenergy.com, or on LinkedIn to learn more about the company, the energy solutions we provide, our commitment to communities, and open positions on our teams. Also like to highlight our recent financial close on Steel River. It's the largest and most complex deal in the industry this year, $3.5 billion financing. And when completed, it'll be one of the largest solar and storage projects in the country.
Great note to finish on. Peter, can you top that?
I cannot. But thank you, Josh. It's been great.
Right. Thank you so much. I really appreciate your time. Thanks so much for bearing with me and discussing all of this in great detail. I can't wait to release this episode. I'm sure the feedback's going to be fantastic. So best of luck with the mission. Thank you so much, and hopefully chat to you again soon.
Thank you.
Thanks, Josh.
Take care.
Well.
So I hope you enjoyed the episode. I think you'll agree the dynamic between Peter and Jeremy worked extremely well. And the conversation really highlighted how executive alignment is so crucial to the development and growth of an organization. But not only that, it's important to consider your own individual career path, moving from an individual contributor and the leadership skills you have to learn, not only in a team leadership role, the director role, but as you move to the executive level and you're running and responsible for functions of which you really know not much about, how you lean on your teams to help empower you and to develop you to grow, and also for you to grow and empower them to fulfill their potential. What stands out to me most in the conversation was their shared pragmatism to really drive and grow the organization. Peter's willingness to say yes to operational challenges and to get on with them, and Jeremy's customer first angle, translating complex structures and strategies into really understanding what the customer needs and starting there. Building a resilient culture and setting the frameworks for your team and the fundamental behaviors that you expect are absolutely crucial to establishing excellence within your organization. And as Jeremy mentioned, within the room, you can debate, you can discuss, you can iron out disagreements, differences of opinion. But once you commit to something and you walk out that room, it's all about execution, and building a team and a culture that understands that is going to be crucial to your success. And I believe when you consider that, that's how you build an organization built to last and allows you to leave it better than you found it. Thank you so much for listening to the episode today. I hope you found it enjoyable and insightful. To hear more about Jeremy and Peter's work, then please do check out Cypress Creek on their website. And to listen to more of these episodes, please like and subscribe, but also consider reaching out to me on LinkedIn or through our website to find out more about GS2 and our executive talent solutions within the energy transition and data center world. Thank you so much for listening, and until next time, take care.